It did bump a little, but she looked like she weathered it okay. Once the fighter's engines were powered down, he finally realized that his entire body had been tense, so he focused on relaxing. No sense in passing out once he jumped down from the hatch. He hit the deck and reached up to help Batak down. "There you go, watch your head there. That's it." She landed with a grunt. She might be injured, so he made a mental note to get her to the transport's sickbay. In fact, she looked dazed. Two security officers blocked his path. One of the men unholstered a gun while the cuffs. He heard Batak assess independence. Damn. She'd been out of IDF for too long. Out of leadership and away from the requirements of being a leader. Away from the spotlight. Away from the need to inspire one's people and to present a steady hand and firm guidance in the face of danger. Her people needed her. And she needed them. She needed them to be their best, and they wouldn't be their best if they thought she was some old baddie woman about to lose it. She rose slowly, confidently out of her chair and turned to face her bridge crew before unleashing a rapid-fire list of orders. "Like riding a bicycle," she thought with an inward grin. "Commence orbital scan. Look for survivors and dispatch shuttles to bring them in. Lieutenant Querty, give me the local IDF brass down on Bolivar. I need to know who was giving orders to the Bolivaran Defense Fleet, and if they were somehow connected to the mutiny. Commander Yarbrough, get the damn ship fixed. Stat! All crews are to be assigned to repair and recovery duties until further notice, with emphasis on repair. I want to be ready if that turd waffle of a ship comes back. Ballsy?" She rose her head to the comm microphones, listening in. "I think you know what to do, Captain. I want you analyzing that ship, everything we've got on it, and hunker down with your boys and girls and figure out some combat strategy against that thing." "You got it, ma'am," Ballsy said through the speakers. She continued rattling off a list of commands, and she was heartened to see her crew spring into action as she gave them direction. None of these people had seen battle. None. Half of them weren't even born yet when Earth and its colonies had nearly been wiped out. She supposed she and Ballsy were the only ones who had been around during the Second Swarm War 30 years ago. Well, them and Captain Prucha, for all the good it had done him. Damn it, Prucha. You left me with a boat full of kids. They had better be more mature than her classes full of snot-nosed preteens in post-teen bodies. "Ma'am," began Lieutenant Querty, a single word drawn out into 2 syllables. "Got Admiral Mullins on the line for you. He's the ranking IDF officer at CENTCOM Bolivar." "Thank you, Lieutenant. Batch it through to the ready room," she said, retreating to a door off to the side of the bridge. She'd only spent a few minutes in there since stepping foot on the ship. She hadn't even packed any of her belongings to decorate the walls or desk, so the space was rather stark and bare. Not that she was the sentimental type for knickknacks and odds and ends that just got in the way, but still. She supposed it was something a normal ship captain would do. Hell, she hadn't even had time to bring a picture of her brother's family to hang on her wall. She considered them her own family, and had essentially adopted her brother's kids, even though he'd been happily married for decades. She could have at least brought a picture of them. The thought reminded her of her main reason for being out here, at least the main unofficial reason. "Danny," she murmured to herself, "where the hell have you gotten yourself to?" She sat down at the desk and waved the video comm on. "Admiral Mullins!" A heavy-set, middle-aged man flashed onto the screen. His gray mustache rested on his upper lip like a dead snail, his brow furrowed and wrinkled like a man who'd lost a lot of sleep. "Admiral Proctor, I see they've dragged you out of retirement, which I suppose means that IDF thinks we're fucked." "Language, Admiral." The other man snorted a quick chuckle, but became serious within seconds. "Proctor, you engaged the ship. Notice anything odd about your crew when you did? About yourself?" She nodded. "We're analyzing that now. Must be some sort of high-level EM interference with a modulation that was somehow able to couple with our brains." She shrugged, acknowledging the improbability of it all. And yet she'd felt it. They'd all felt it. "Is that even possible?" "We have several hundred witnesses up here that say it's possible, Admiral. And you've half a planetary defense fleet that went rogue on me. I think that speaks for itself. He nodded, and his mustache bristled as he frowned. We've got about 20 million people down here that can back them up. Proctor, ever since that ship entered orbit a few hours ago, we've had massive social unrest. Riots, violence, arson, on a planet-wide scale. It's like something just exploded in the minds of everyone down here all at the same time. Even I was feeling it. Nearly bit the head off my chief of staff.
Is everyone okay? Looks like the effect is highly localized.
Admiral Mullins looked off camera as if to receive a report and nodded curtly at whoever was speaking to him. He turned back to Proctor. A few thousand deaths across the planet. All told, it's remarkable that's all there were. And yes, I can confirm that the effect was localized. The areas most intensely affected were directly under the orbital path of the ship. But, Shelby, riots happened everywhere. Bolivar isn't the most stable planet, politically, I mean. She frowned. What do you mean? Bolivar is a hotbed for GPC activity. Half of the Bolivarian Planetary Senate are GPC loyalists. And to be honest, he looked to his left as if to check who was in the room with him. I think half the ship captains of the Planetary Defense Fleet are too.
Well, that made sense, she thought wryly.
Well, no, I'm not sure. But there have been rumblings, whispers. Not exactly of an uprising or mutiny or anything like that, but rumors. Messages I've seen that the senders weren't planning on me seeing seem to suggest that there's widespread discontent with UE's central authority, even among some of the IDF officers at CENTCOM Bolivar.
That was troubling. Why had Oppenheimer not told her anything about that? She'd remembered 10 years ago that there were rumblings in the lower officer corps about the GPC, but nothing in the open. Especially not among her top admiralty and ship captains. Do you think there's a deeper problem here? Or is it really just grumbling?
Mullins shrugged. A few weeks ago, I'd have said it was nothing. But ever since Sangre...
The situation's inflamed, she finished for him.
That's being generous. Sangre blew the lid off the pot. It changed everything. Where before we had simmering tensions between GPC separatists and UE loyalists, well, now we've got... well, not open fighting, but tension is too naive. 9 officers have been found dead in the last week, either in their quarters or some back alley in the city, or on some hiking trail out in the suburbs. Violence against both sides is skyrocketing. This world is a powder keg, Admiral, along with half a dozen other worlds in the Irigoyen sector, if my sources are right.
San Martin?
He nodded. That's basically the epicenter of the GPC organization. Bolivar is probably the second biggest, but the GPC's Secretary General lives on San Martin, they say, and have his shadow cabinet.
Curiel. I'd heard he was dead, assassinated by his own bodyguards.
Mullins chuckled. Rumor. Probably spread by Curiel himself to confuse IDF intel. But my source swears she saw him 2 weeks ago, alive and well.
Proctor shook her head. She didn't have time for this. She wasn't a politician, and she wasn't an intelligence official. She just wanted to save her civilization from an existential alien threat, and hopefully find her nephew in the process. She didn't have time for humans being humans. Admiral, while this is all very interesting, I think I'm the wrong person to be talking to. You need the chief of IDF Intel out here. Get your heads together. But as for me, the Independence is out of here as soon as repairs are done, and I've completed a little mission of a personal nature planetside.
Oh?
His eyebrows rose, questioning. My nephew. I think he's got a few friends down there I want to question. The thing is, he's missing. He nodded, almost as if he'd been expecting her to say it.
I know.
Her eyes narrowed. How do you know?
Because you know that source that told me she saw Secretary General?
He held up 2 sets of fingers as air quotes.
Curiel 2 weeks ago? Well, my source happens to be Danny Proctor's girlfriend. I'm sorry, Shelby.
but it looks like your nephew is a GPC pilot."
She opened her mouth and closed it again, grasping at something to say.
"Fuck,"
was all she could settle on.
"Watch your language, Shelby," he deadpanned.
Chapter 18. Irigoyen Sector, Bolivar System, Bolivar. Rescue Ship Miguel S. Urquiza, High Orbit. Civic's mind was racing. Staring down the barrel of a gun tended to have that effect.
"And you are?"
He flashed a wide smile. "Nothing to see here, folks. Move along."
"Bolivarian Intelligence Service,"
one of them said, pulling his badge out and flashing it too quickly to see.
"We've been monitoring your movements and communications,"
he added, as if that answered everything, as if that automatically made Civic guilty of whatever they were implying.
"You'll come with us now, sir."
They advanced toward him, slowly. Civic realized his hands were already in the air, automatically. It's amazing what one's body automatically does in response to threat, he thought. Wait a minute. Bolivarian Intelligence Service, what the hell is that? To his surprise, someone moved in front of him, stopping their advance. It was Batak. Her arms were folded and her face said, "Don't mess with me."
"Bullshit,"
she said.
"I know you. I've seen you around the offices and warehouses, even up on station. You're Shovik Orion. Security, right?"
The man with the gun looked taken aback, but quickly regained his footing.
"Switched jobs a few months back. Come on, let's go."
He motioned with the gun towards one of the exits. Several people nearby had noticed the standoff and were rushing away, making the man with the gun glance at them with what was clearly apprehension. They clearly did not want to be seen. Thankfully, the deck officer of the transport approached.
"Is there a problem here?"
he said angrily. As angrily as he dared to be with someone holding a gun.
"Gentlemen, may I see your badges?"
While they were fumbling for their IDs, Civic glanced around the giant cargo bay, which had obviously been refitted in a hurry to serve as a shuttle hold for a rescue operation. Frightened people were stumbling out of their ships, merchant freighters, pleasure yachts, tourist corvettes, orbital transfer shuttles, and moving quickly towards the exits, ushered by flight deck staff to make room for the steady stream of newly arriving ships. One particular shuttle stood out to him. Holy shit. It was the shuttle from the Watchdog station, Fenway, the one the two murderers had escaped in. It was unmistakable. The deck officer looked up from the IDs the intel officers had handed him.
"Everything looks to be in order. Mr. Civic, I suggest you cooperate. Don't give us any shit. Not on my deck."
He took a few steps back, and seeing another commotion from the passengers of another merchant freighter, he left. The man with the gun smiled.
"So, Lieutenant Civic, do we do this the easy way or the hard way? I'd greatly prefer the easy way. I don't want to see anyone else here get hurt. You're already responsible for enough death today."
Civic's eyes darted to the shuttle again and back to the gun, his mind racing furiously. Obviously, something was up. Not just something, this was conspiracy theory level shit here. The two men on board the Watchdog in IDF uniforms. These two guys in the uniforms of what was probably a completely fabricated organization. Batak claiming that at least one of them was a Shovik Orion employee. The deck officer taking their side, though he supposed in his shoes, seeing the gun and not wanting a gunfight to erupt in the middle of a desperate rescue operation, Civic would probably do the same. And the shuttle. Fenway. His hands were still up, and he nodded.
"The easy way, if you don't mind. Sarah, if you'll excuse me." "No, her too. She'll be investigated as an accomplice,"
said the man with the handcuffs. Civic allowed them to cuff him. They shoved him ahead, and Batak followed closely behind, with the two men bringing up the rear, corralling them towards one of the exits. Luckily, that exit lay just beyond the shuttle Fenway. As they passed it, he rammed into Batak with his shoulder, pushing both of them around the corner of the shuttle. "Open it and get in, fast!" She was quick on the draw, he'd give her that. Without waiting even half a second, she had punched the hatch controls. It was going to take at least 5 seconds for the hatch to open completely, so he needed to do something incredibly stupid to stall for time. The gun, and the hands holding it appeared around the corner of the shuttle, and Civic did his best imitation of a karate kick. To his complete surprise, the gun went flying. Holy shit! That only... And the other leaped to tackle Civic. They both went down in a tangle of thrashing arms and legs. He heard a solid thud, and his opponent went limp. Batak grabbed his arm, yanking him up the ramp just as gunshots rang out, hitting the hatch next to his head in a hail of sparks. He dove in and rolled out of the way of the entrance as the door started to close. Apparently, Batak had managed to hit the controls again. More gunfire, striking the opposite wall from the closing ramp, and then hitting the backside of the ramp itself as it sealed shut. He finally risked a glance back up at Batak, who stood there trembling, still holding the plasma welding torch she must have used on the other man's head. "You keep that in your pocket?" he said with a lopsided smile. "Damn, Civic. Now's not the time for flirting." She began. She was trembling even more now. He stood up, which was decidedly more difficult with handcuffs on than without. "Hatch locked?" She nodded vigorously, eyes wide. He saw that her fingers were gripping the plasma welder so tight that her knuckles were white. He turned around and presented his handcuffed wrists to her. "Will that work on these?" "Yeah," she said, snapping into the moment as she brought the torch to bear on his wrists. "Don't cut my hands off, please. They're actually my best feet." The cuffs dropped onto the floor. Damn, she was good. "Wow, I hardly felt what you were doing." He rubbed his wrists. "That's what she said." He did a double take. She still looked half in shock, but the comment, combined with the slight wink, told him she'd be just fine. Maybe. Her hands were still trembling. Freed from the cuffs, he ran for the navigation station cockpit. The shuttle was small, only a cockpit, 3 tiny crew quarters, a mess and a cargo bay, which was little more than a glorified trunk. He'd only flown one a few times before. It was the last thing he flew before he lost his wings. He took a deep breath to ground himself before he slid into the pilot's seat. "You can do this, Civic." "Hold on. We're making what you might call a quick getaway. Strap in." He fired up the engines and skipped the pre-flight checklist. Rather, he grabbed the controls and immediately lifted the shuttle off the deck, soared up high towards the ceiling to avoid hitting any refugees standing nearby, and shot through the shimmering blue field that held the atmosphere in. "What the hell just happened back there?" she said. He steered the shuttle away from the Urquiza and angled up towards the North Pole of Bolivar. He had no idea where they were going, but he figured the fewer people that knew where he was, the better. And there was no better place to hide than over a magnetic pole of a planet, especially one with such a strong magnetic field like Bolivar. It had been wreaking havoc with his regularly scheduled sensor scans aboard the Watchdog ever since he'd started his tour there. Now it was finally working in his favor. "I don't know." "What did you do on the Watchdog? Why are they trying to arrest you?" He shook his head. Jerry Underwood spun helplessly in his mind, flinging blood in a slow spiral. It was like a video on repeat. Spin, spin, blood, spatter, spin. "I don't think it's what I did. I think it's what I saw." Chapter 19. Irigoyen Sector, Bolivar System, Bolivar. Shuttle, Bolivar Stratosphere. A GPC pilot. Her little nephew. The one she had bounced on her knees and played with on the beach and changed his diapers while she was stationed on Britannia as the Fleet Admiral of IDF. A pilot. For the goddamned Galactic People's Congress. What the hell did people see in that gang of miscreants? "Damn it, Ballsy! What the hell do people see in that gang of miscreants?" She stared fiercely at the screen on her hand unit. Vols looked back at her, shrugging. She puffed air out in frustration and glanced out the window of the shuttle as the compressed atmosphere glowed red with re-entry. "Freedom's a powerful word, Shelby," he began before she cut him off. "Freedom? How in the world is United Earth not free? How can anyone possibly think that? Are they mistaking us for the Russian Confederation? The Caliphate? The CIDR? I'm sure the Chinese would dispute your insinuations, but that's not the point, Shelby.
How is that not the point, Balsy? Enlighten me.
She was agitated, and treating him harsher than she meant. But he took it in stride, seeming to understand that the source of her consternation was not him, or even the GPC thugs, but that little boy she... There are GPC air quotes around the people.
People my ass.
The shuttle bounced in the upper atmospheric turbulence, and she glanced at the ETA timer on the pilot's dashboard. 5.5 minutes to Shovik Orion City, Bolivar. Shovik Orion City. Idiot corporations and their idiotic naming and branding schemes. Her executive assistant, a young red-haired ensign with a noticeable bump on her lower abdomen, entered the cabin from the tiny galley, offering Proctor a steaming cup of tea.
Thank you, Ensign Flay.
Vols continued. Have you been in a mining colony before, Shelby?
This isn't the 22nd century anymore, Ballsy. Sure, humans did awful things to each other. Sure, the mining colonies out on Ceres and Vesta, and all the other asteroid belt settlements were scandalous, ugly affairs. But that was 500 years ago.
Vols shrugged again. Uh-huh. But tell that to people living in mining colonies today. Yeah, they're not necessarily starving or growing up with chronic bone deformities because of the low G. But you ask any iridium miner whether he actually wants to be there, guess what you're going to hear? You ask some farmer out on Cadiz whether they want UE bureaucrats 200 light-years away on Britannia deciding the finer details of harvest equipment certifications. You ask Russian merchants on Serene if they want a distant Russian Confederation government telling them what they should be paying in taxes just because they live on the wrong side of their own city.
Then they can leave. They can move on and go farm somewhere else, or sign up for IDF, or go on the dole if they want. Seriously, my taxes are high enough that half of UE could be living like kings if they didn't throw it all away on post-swarm war defense posturing.
Ballsy's eyes narrowed. Come on, Shelby, you were the architect of half those programs.
Like hell. It was all President Singh. I was constantly telling him the swarm was gone. I killed the last ship after all. And my Secura contacts assured me that they could detect nothing through their mental metaspace link, the ligature or whatever they call it. The swarm was dead. There was no reason to spend 95% of our friggin' galactic budget on defense if all there was to defend against was each other.
Ballsy fell quiet, looking at her intensely through the comm device on his lap. So then what the hell was that thing out there? That ship? She paused, thinking, considering. It just didn't feel like the swarm. The swarm was relentless, overpowering, almost bloodthirsty. So far, the best descriptor she had for this mysterious ship was... erratic.
I don't know.
You think it's the swarm? She slowly shook her head.
No.
Me either. Look, you go find your nephew. I've got my pilots here in the conference room and we're poring over the vids and scans, designing appropriate attack measures and defensive postures. And I've borrowed some of your bridge tactical folks and we're doing the same with them, figuring out how the Independence itself should respond next time. When you face them again, you'll have some options.
She smiled. Thank you, Ballsy. I'm glad you're with me on this one, after seeing Jeremy go out like that.
He nodded. His face was taut, as if he were trying desperately not to feel, not to hurt. Rucha was a good man. Let's make sure no more join him. Vols out. His face winked out from the comm, and she settled in for the rest of the descent. She prepared herself to meet this woman, this mystery person that Admiral Mullins claimed was Danny's girlfriend. This woman who had apparently been in such a position that she'd not only seen the so-called Secretary General Curiel of the GPC, but also been in a position to report it to Mullins. The hell was she, an intel agent? She supposed she'd soon find out. Mullins had arranged a meeting, and Proctor was on her way to CENTCOM Bolivar in Shovik Orion City to talk to her in a briefing room, and finally get some answers about her nephew. Ensign Flay had strapped in and was on her comm device, coordinating Proctor's security with the Marine office at CENTCOM Bolivar. Eventually, she shut the device down and nodded over at her.
All set, Admiral. Thank you, Ensign Flay.
Her eyes dropped down momentarily to her abdomen.
congratulations. Oh,
the ensign replied, blushing slightly.
thank you. 7 months went fast. Maternity leave starts next week, if you were wondering. Sorry you'll have a disruption in your staff. I'll train my replacement well and make sure it's as painless as...
Proctor held up a reassuring hand.
It's all right, Ensign. Life happens. And besides, this is a short-term assignment for me anyway. I won't even be here next week.
The young ensign looked relieved. Proctor reviewed a few administrative items with her, and before long the ETA timer had ticked its way down to 0. She unstrapped herself from the seat and descended the shuttle's ramp.
I'll be with you shortly, ma'am. I need to hand off the shuttle to the guard,
said Flay from the cockpit. Proctor nodded her approval and continued down to the landing pad where she met an aide to Admiral Mullins, who had come with a Marine Honor Guard. They indicated toward the entrance to the massive CENTCOM building from the landing pad, where 2 more guards stood at attention. And suddenly the guards were no longer standing. They were flying. Flames gutted windows all around them, and the doors blasted outward in a jarring explosion. Proctor touched her forehead, and her hand came away red. She didn't realize until moments later that she was lying on the ground several meters past the shuttle from where she'd been walking.
Don't pass out. Don't pass out.
Chapter 20. Irigoyen Sector, Bolivar System, Bolivar. Shuttle Fenway, high orbit.
What do you mean they're following us?
Civic eyed the sensor readout, pointing at the map of the surrounding space in their orbit over Bolivar. Transponder codes and insignia from hundreds of different ships dotted the schematic, but the main one, the biggest one, had changed course, and was headed straight towards them on an intercept course. That's what I'm saying. The Urquiza is on our tail, and if those 2 Bolivaran intelligence officers, he made some air quotes with his fingers, are any indication, there's clearly some people that want us off the board. And they're high up enough to redirect Bolivar's main emergency response ship. That spells trouble if I ever saw it. She shook her head in disbelief.
I just don't get it. So you saw a guy get offed. I mean, that's really bad. Sure, it's murder. But let's face it, the entire station exploded. You'd think the authorities would have bigger fish to fry here.
What's the connection, Civic?
What?
She said. He hadn't realized he had murmured the question under his breath. Sorry, just... What's the connection? 2 IDF officers blow a guy away on a station that's just been hit by a mysterious ship and is about to go critical. They steal a shuttle, which later shows up on the relief cruiser. Then 2 different guys working for a phony intel service try to kill me.
Shovik Orion,
she murmured. What?
That's the only connection. Shovik Orion. Jerry Underwood was a Shovik Orion employee, and I swear at least one of those goons back there was too. At least, I think he was. There's been tons of staffing changes lately. Lots of new people, lots of old hands getting pink slips, new managers, same old shit.
He shrugged, eyeing the schematic map warily. It would take the Urquiza a while to spin up its engines enough to change course, and their shuttle had a good head start. But the massive colonial transporter had more thrust than they did, and most likely a few hidden railguns. What the hell would a corporation want with me? Why would they kill the contractor? You don't think they have anything to do with the alien ship, do you? I mean, you work for Shovik Orion, right? You'd have heard... something.
Well, yes and no. I'm technically with a subcontractor, Snell Staffing Corp.
She pointed to a tiny name badge on her chest, which had been obscured by a rip in the fabric. It displayed her name, Sarah Batak, along with a little company logo made up of 2 intertwined S's surrounded by a larger C. He frowned and brought up the shuttle's computer. Those 2 IDF guys were looking for something. The contractor, Jerry, claimed it was on board the shuttle. Go check the hold, will you? The restraints across her chest and hips fell away as she sprang out of her seat and ducked out of the cockpit. It seemed that, with something to finally do, she had some pent-up energy, an outlet for the nervousness and stress that came from being shot at, and almost exploded.
Nothing,
she called back from the tiny cargo hold.
It's empty.
No hidden panels or anything? She reappeared in the cockpit.
In a T-39? These things are built for space efficiency. No hidden panels, no compartments under the floor, nada.
You're saying this thing ain't built for smugglers. Fine. So whatever was here is gone. Those 2 IDF assassin guys made off with it. He scanned the computer logs for the shuttle's most recent ports of call. Usually the shuttles on Watchdog were used to transport crew members on and off station, and it relied on the contractors like Shovik Orion to shuttle their own supplies and materials on their own transport ships. But there was always a chance he was wrong. Looks like the last time this thing left the Bolivar system, it went to San Martin, he said, running through the logs.
Makes sense, she said. It's the center of power here in the Irigoyen sector. Center of commerce, yada yada.
And that's where we're going. He glanced at the schematic map to check on the Urquiza trailing them. Sure enough, it was catching up. He did a scan of the ship, and just as he thought, he saw that an exterior panel had retracted, revealing the unmistakable profile of a railgun. It was still in the process of swiveling towards them. And there's our cue to leave. He entered the coordinates for San Martin into the Q-Jump drive computer and confirmed that the cap banks were full. Shuttle's caps are small, so it should take us a few dozen jumps to get out there. Settle in for a good nap. With any luck, I can tap into CENTCOM San Martin when we get there and find out where my pops is.
You really think he can help us? If this is some kind of IDF, Shovik Orion, GPC alien conspiracy thingy, what good can one guy do against that?
Don't know. He pushed the initiator button when the Q-Jump computer indicated it was ready. The view out the front window port adjusted. The green-blue of Bolivar disappeared, along with the approaching Urquiza, replaced by the blackness of deep space. But he knows people, and they know people. He glanced up at her. She didn't look convinced. At this point, what other choice do we have? Chapter 21. Irigoyen Sector, Bolivar System, Bolivar. Hutchins Memorial Hospital, room 1400. When she woke up, Proctor was a little surprised to see Admiral Mullins standing over her. What the hell had let him in her quarters? She'd have to have a stern talk with her Marine detachment, but not before getting something for the splitting headache. It was the searing pain that finally jogged her memory. She was not in her quarters. She was in a hospital in Shovik Orion City.
What the hell happened, Tim?
She murmured, rubbing her forehead. A wrinkled frown bloomed down Mullins's face. Tim? Oh, damn, she thought.
Sorry, Ted. Old habit. Last time I was this injured, it was...
Mullins nodded. On the Warrior, with Captain Granger.
Yes.
That blast must have hit her hard. She forced her eyes open and blinked a few times.
Please tell me that wasn't a bomb.
It wasn't a bomb. She looked at him incredulously, then glanced around at the other beds in the intensive care unit, all of them full.
Bull,
she replied. It was a well-timed power surge that triggered a cascade buildup and subsequent failure in the internal cap banks at CENTCOM. We rely on our own power, of course, and not the city's grid, and it looks like in this case it bit us rather firmly in the ass.
You're telling me it was an accident?
He looked down at her gravely, slowly shaking his head. No, I'm not.
Shit.
She repeated the word in her head like a mantra. She was desperately trying to deal with a potentially civilization-ending threat embodied by a mysterious, unthinkably powerful ship, while simultaneously trying to find her lost nephew. She didn't have time to deal with saboteurs and malcontents.
Who the hell was it then?
He sat down in the chair next to her bed. We're still trying to figure that out. Whoever it was, they had long-term access to CENTCOM's power systems, and the expertise to pull this off under the radar, right under our noses. And the expertise to keep us from immediately being able to know who it was. They've covered their tracks like regular pros.
Speculate, then.
Proctor glanced around for a nurse or the attending physician. The pain was subsiding, but her back ached, and she wanted a rundown of her injuries before she duly ignored the sound medical advice and returned to the Independence to save civilization as they knew it. GPC loyalists? Who else could it be?
Are they that brazen already?
Extremists always are. What zealot ever waits until it's prudent to act? They always jump at the chance to make a big splash and catch everyone's attention.
She frowned. Zealot? What do you mean? Mullen shrugged and hesitated a moment before continuing.
I have reason to believe that this is not just GPC. There might be a Grangerite element to this.
She rolled her eyes.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
You don't think some of them would be capable?
She shook her head and caught the eye of the doctor at another bed across the room, waving him over.
It's not that they're not capable. It's just that I still can't believe that A, there are Grangerites to begin with, and B, that any of them would leave their temples or churches or underground lairs or whatever the hell they have long enough to plan something like this.
We've had 30 years to get used to the idea of Grangerites, Shelby.
And I had 4 months before that to get used to the idea that Tim Granger was a human being. Not some kind of goddamned prophet. Seriously, if you'd seen him like I saw him, knew him like I knew him, you'd realize the absolute absurdity of it.
He held up his hands defensively.
Hey, no need to convince me of their lunacy. But just because we think they're lunatics for worshipping a bloke we all knew, praying that he comes back to save us all and bring us candy and unity.
Vote for ignoramuses. And last time I checked, there weren't any Grangerite candidates in any elections that matter.
All I'm saying is that, well, I've just heard things. Rumors. That something big is going to happen, or has happened, or is happening. Something that the true zealots are excited about. And then this explosion happens. Right as you show up. Coincidence?
But Ted, who the hell would want to kill me?
The attending physician finally arrived at her bed and looked questioningly at Mullins, as if expecting him to leave. He stood up, but touched Proctor's elbow and leaned down towards her ear.
I'm not sure it was you they were trying to kill.
Her eyes grew wide, and she knew what he was going to say before he said it.
Fiona Liu, her nephew's girlfriend? She's dead.
Chapter 22. Irigoyen Sector, Interstellar Space, Shuttle Fenway. Civic wondered how anyone could stand interstellar travel in a ship with such small Q-jump cap banks. And when he thought about it too much, it gave him a sense of almost overpowering vertigo. You never think about how empty it is out here until you're in it, he murmured, staring out the port at the endless stars.
Huh?
Patak stirred and opened her eyes. Oops, he thought, not realizing she'd dozed off. Space. Interstellar space is just so empty. Think about it. If that cap bank fails, we're 50,000 years from the nearest star at full thrust. We lose the cap banks and the metaspace transmitter in one go. Then here we are, stuck for the rest of our lives on this shuttle.
The rest of our very short lives,
she said, closing her eyes again and leaning back.
Only so much food the material reprocessors could make out of our shit.
He squirmed at the thought. Luckily, the console beeped to distract him. Coming up on Q-jump number 352. 811 to go. Only 810 if we decide to stop off at Elamine. To stare at the abyss. It's like walking on a tightrope over a bottomless cliff. One wrong step and pow, you're falling forever, never dying until you have a heart attack or starve.
Huh?
She repeated.
You're starting to worry me, with all your morbid talk.
I wonder if this is what it was like for Granger.
Huh?
He was starting to wonder if that was her only response when she was trying to sleep. You know, as he was falling into that black hole. She grunted.
Falling? I thought he was aiming.
A smile tugged at his lips. Huh. Right. Swarm never knew what hit him. She shifted in her seat, eyes still closed, trying to get comfortable.
Assuming he actually hit them.
What do you mean?
Well, as of a few weeks ago, he was still technically falling in. Hadn't even crossed the event horizon yet from our perspective. So my question is, how did that actually stop the swarm from sending metaspace signals out of that black hole from their own universe? If Granger hadn't even fallen in yet and blew them to smithereens with the antimatter aboard the Victory. And what was the plan, anyway? There's a lot the higher-ups never told us. I think they're covering up for something, if you ask me.
He blew a puff of air in disbelief. What, you're not a Grangerite, are you? Or a conspiracy theorist? A wry smile crossed her lips, even though her eyes stayed closed.
Right. Because conspiracies never happen. Just ask Jerry Underwood.
He shrugged. Touché.
And no, I'm not a Grangerite. Those people are a little mentally disturbed, if you ask me,
she murmured.
But my brother-in-law is. My sister and he were Methodists. Well, she still is, and the kids. But he started falling in for the Grangerite stuff a few years ago. But he was always a little whacked.
I just don't understand how they can deify a guy like that. Dad always talked about him, Granger. Said he was just this regular dude. A bloke, as Mom called him. And now these freaks are turning him into a god? Seriously? Welcome to the 27th century, people.
Catholics do it all the time.
Huh? Now it was his turn for the huns.
You know, saints and all that.
Oh. Right. Still, at least they... He trailed off, wondering what point he was about to make.
At least they what?
You know, at least they've got almost 3,000 years of precedent and history behind them. They've been making people saints for millennia, and Jesus is, like, you know, ancient history. There's some historical heft there. The same with Muhammad and Buddha and whatever religion you want. But Granger? We've got video of him. People are still alive that knew him. How do you make a god out of that? Especially now, you know, in the present? Modern society, modern culture and all that?
I'm sure people living around Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha thought the same thing.
Yeah? And what happened to them? She shrugged.
They either all converted or were killed, I guess.
Oh, that's a wonderful thought. Her eyes still closed, she flashed a devious smile.
So, would you rather lose Q-jump engines to stellar space in a shuttle, or convert to Grangerism?
He chuckled. Depends. Can I bring a deck of cards on the shuttle? Or at least a multi-level marketing sales presentation pamphlet? Then I choose the shuttle. The console beeped again. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for jump number 353, he announced. She grunted.
You know, I'm trying to sleep here.
Fine, I'll shut up. She smiled and snuggled down further into her seat. But before I do, she frowned. Help me think through this. What could be so important that someone would kill for it right in the middle of a battle when the station is about to explode? She shrugged.
Chocolate?
I'm serious here.
So am I. Are you going to let me sleep or not?
He sighed. Just thought it might be important to think about, seeing how someone's trying to, you know, kill us because we already know too much about it.
Not much we can do about it now, can we? In case you hadn't noticed, we're kinda in interstellar space.
He ignored her. It was crucial that they figure this out, and not only to save their own necks, it just felt wrong. There was far more riding on this than just a few hired goons shooting at them. Something big was happening, or was about to happen. It was either a weapon, or evidence about something. Evidence of some conspiracy or wrongdoing or whatever. The guy, Underwood, kept on calling it it. So it's a singular item, not a collection of things. Unless it meant like a crate with lots of stuff in it. Or maybe...
You're not even making any sense,
she mumbled. I'm wondering if it's connected to sangre. She frowned.
I'm not good with Spanish. Blood?
Sangre de Cristo.
Oh. You think it was another nuke? Aren't those, you know, conspicuous?
He nodded. Well, yeah. Especially since they're banned. He bolted upright, then stood. She finally opened her eyes.
What? What is it?
If it was a nuke, we can tell. He dashed out of the cockpit and she rolled out of her seat to follow him. As if reading his mind, she grabbed the engine diagnostic toolkit and pulled out the general-purpose scanner.
What band?
She asked, fiddling with the handheld device. Gamma band. That's the one that will detect any leftover radioactive signature. She nodded, frustratedly.
Sorry, I should know that.
You're good. He worried about her. It was clear she was still in a little shock from the previous day's traumatic events, in spite of her show of bravado and humor. She went into the cargo hold and waved the detector back and forth across the floor, over the walls, up to the ceiling. He waited, patiently.
Damn it, hurry the hell up. Okay, looks like...
She paused. And? He asked.
Nothing. No leftover radioactive signature.
He sighed. Well, it was worth a shot. He started heading back to the cockpit. She wasn't moving.
Wait, I'm reading something now.
He stopped in the doorway. What is it? Her eyes went wide.
I've no idea.
Chapter 23. Irigoyen Sector, Bolivar System, Bolivar. Bridge, ISS Independence. The doctor had recommended bed rest and observation for a day in the hospital, followed by a week of recuperating at home, along with pain meds and reconstructive enzyme therapy for the torn ligament in her right leg, and some frightfully large orange pill as a precaution against hemorrhaging because of her concussion. Proctor had smiled, thanked her, and told her to go to hell when the doctor protested her getting out of bed and boarding her shuttle back up to the Independence. "Admiral on the bridge," called out one of the Marines at the entrance as she hobbled through.
Damn, was she hobbling?
Commander Yarbrough looked up suddenly from the XO's station.
Admiral? Are you feeling well enough to continue with the mission? Am I dead?
Yarbrough's eyes narrowed slightly. His reply was slightly hesitant.
No? Then we're continuing the mission. Prepare for T-jump. Any new sign of the mystery ship?
He shook his head, then glanced at Tactical, and Lieutenant Whitehorse flashed a quick thumbs down.
No, Admiral, no sign of it.